Hello everyone and welcome to WEBN's live coverage of the 2020 presidential election. I'm Angel Salcido.
And I'm Daniela Lobo Rivera. Tonight, we will be bringing you election results as they come in, as well as taking a look back of how we got here in this historic year that has been 2020.
Let's start with how this all goes down. There are 538 electoral votes up for grabs, and a candidate will need 270 to win the presidency.
Cities around the country are preparing for possible unrest in the streets, with many businesses boarding up their windows earlier today, including here in Boston. With the historic amount of mail-in ballots this year due to the pandemic, we're expecting to see some delayed results. Many states are predicting they will not have a winner by the end of the night.
But we do have some results coming in from polls that closed earlier this evening. Joining us now is our political analyst Tyler Englander, who will be with us throughout the night. Tyler, what are polls telling us so far?
The all-important races for the presidency. Let's take a look at the popular vote polls so far. This is an average of the polls. The former vice president, Joe Biden, an 8-point lead, 52% compared to Donald Trump's 44%. But take a look at what happened 4 years ago. The popular vote simply doesn't matter. Secretary Hillary Clinton won by 2.9 million votes, 2%. Donald Trump still won the White House. As we know, the only thing that matters in an American presidential election, who will be the candidate to get to 270 electoral votes. Let's look at the map from 4 years ago. Donald Trump, 304 electoral votes. He won the presidency. Secretary Hillary Clinton only got to 227. What are the big takeaways from the map 4 years ago? Let's look at Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Those three states, typical Democratic states for the better part of 30 years, Donald Trump broke down the Democratic blue wall. That helped him win the White House. Let's take a look at our projected map here this year. We can see Joe Biden, we've got the former vice president already over the 270 electoral vote threshold. Big points of emphasis on this map, Joe Biden trying to rebuild that Democratic blue wall. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, we've got those three states lean Democratic. Another big takeaway, you guys can see Arizona down on the West Coast. Arizona's only gone to a Democrat at the presidential level once since 1952. We've got Arizona leaning towards Joe Biden. Another key takeaway, see all the states in brown, Texas, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, those we've got as toss-ups. Those all went to the president 4 years ago. We've got some early results coming in from Florida. Let's take a look at how it shaped up last election cycle. This is Donald Trump's home state. He beat Secretary Clinton by 1%, about 112,000 votes. Interesting note about Florida, it is the closest state in the country. The last three governor's races, last two presidential elections, the results were within a point. Here are some of the early numbers from Florida. You can see it is a razor-thin race. 79% of the precincts reporting Joe Biden with a slight lead, about 50,000 votes, but pretty close percentage-wise. Let's look at some of the other swing states. Michigan, this was a real shocker in 2016. Donald Trump, the first Republican to win the state since George H.W. Bush in 1988. Razor-thin margin as well. Only about 10,000 votes separated Donald Trump and Secretary Clinton. The polls this year, much more friendly to the former Vice President Joe Biden. We're showing about an 8-point lead. Again, 16 electoral votes with Donald Trump playing defense. Those are critical electoral votes for him. Keeping on the theme of those blue wall states, Pennsylvania, last cycle, 44,000 votes separated Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Much like Michigan, the president, the first Republican to win the state since George H.W. Bush in 1988. The polls, again, pretty friendly to the former Vice President Joe Biden. We're showing about a 5-point lead. Biden from Scranton, very familiar with the white middle-class voters in Pennsylvania. Coming into the night, if you ask the Trump camp, they thought Pennsylvania was their best chance at winning one of those blue wall states. Final blue wall state, we've got Wisconsin. Again, razor-thin margin 4 years ago. Donald Trump, about a 22,000 vote advantage over Secretary Clinton. The polls this year, again, they look pretty solid for the former Vice President Joe Biden. 52% to 44%, very similar to the total national poll. Joe Biden, again, if he can get Wisconsin's 10 electoral votes, he could be looking at 4 more years in the White House. Let's take a look at the map. If nothing changes from 2016 except Joe Biden wins Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, he rebuilds that Democratic blue wall, that would be enough to get Joe Biden over the hump, over the 270 electoral vote threshold. He would win 4 years, his first 4 years in the White House. Some other swing states we're watching, Arizona, as I mentioned, only gone to a Democrat once since 1952. Pretty comfortable lead for the president there 4 years ago, 49% to 45%, but it shrunk considerably considering Mitt Romney won the state by 9 in 2012. Why is Arizona lean Democratic? In large part, it's due to growth. Nevada is the fastest growing state in the country. Arizona, the 4th fastest growing state. That is in large part due to younger voters, Latino voters. That should help the former Vice President Joe Biden. Let's look at the polls. Again, we've got Joe Biden within the margin of error, about 3%, but that is a drastic change. Something to keep in mind, Kyrsten Sinema, 2018, she ran as a Democrat for the U.S. Senate. She won in the state, becoming the first Democrat to represent Arizona in the Senate since 1988. Arizona, it's a changing electorate, much more purple than red. Let's look at the map once more. Once we get Arizona in there, it's 11 electoral votes. That gives Joe Biden some breathing room. If all that changes, the 3 blue wall states plus Arizona, that gives Joe Biden 290 electoral votes. Donald Trump, you can see, simply can't afford to lose Arizona. Some other swing states, Georgia, the Peach State, again, a typically red, reliable Republican state. Only Democrat to win it since 1952 was Bill Clinton in 1992. See Donald Trump, 5-point lead in the state 4 years ago. Take a look at the polls this time around. Again, razor thin, much like Florida. 1-point lead for Biden in the polls. Why is Georgia so competitive this time around? Joe Biden can thank Stacey Abrams, the Democrat who ran for governor in 2018. She would lose to Brian Kemp by a pretty thin margin. Along the way, she registered 250,000 Georgians to vote for the first time. That is mostly black and brown Americans. That should help the former vice president. Another swing state we're following, North Carolina. This was a state Barack Obama and Joe Biden won in 2008. But again, a pretty reliable Republican red state. Donald Trump, 4-point lead there 4 years ago. The polls this time around, again, favoring the vice president. 2-point advantage in North Carolina. They're expecting sky-high turnout. 95% of the 2016 electorate already voted in early voting. That's thanks in large part due to a competitive Senate race as well as a competitive governor's race. Some more swing states to take a look at. Ohio, everyone remembers 2004. Ohio is what separated President Bush and John Kerry. Ohio, a pretty strong lead for the president, 8 points. Ohio should be where the president thrives. It's a whiter and older electorate than the rest of the country. But when you take a look at the polls, the president has slipped a little. We're showing about a 1-point lead for Donald Trump. He hopes that the rest of the electorate swings towards him the rest of the way. Interesting note about Ohio. Out of every state in the U.S., it is most likely to predict the winner of the presidential election. In 28 out of the 30 elections since 1900, the candidate that wins Ohio has won the presidency, something to keep in mind the rest of the night. Couple more swing states for you. Iowa, again, great state for Donald Trump 4 years ago. He won by 9 points. The polls tightening once more this time around. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's about a 2-point difference. Can we change the graphic? 2-point difference, Joe Biden and Donald Trump in Iowa. Last swing state we're going to take a look at, Texas. When you think of Texas, you think red Republican. It's the state that produced LBJ, George W. Bush. You can see 4 years ago, pretty red Republican state. Donald Trump won by 9 points. But for Texas, much like Arizona, it's all about growth. Texas has registered almost 3 million new voters since 2016. 2 million of them are Latinos. That should help Joe Biden. You can see that in the polls. Donald Trump only up 1 in Texas. This is our map right now. Everything in blue you see is lean or solid Democrat. Anything you see in red is lean, solid Republican. Donald Trump only at 125 electoral votes. He's going to have to win every swing state in order to be competitive and pick off 1 or 2 of Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. We're watching all the swing states, polls closing around the country here at the 8 o'clock hour. We'll be back with more results. Danny, Angel, back over to you.
Thanks, Tyler. Now, like we mentioned before, we likely will not know the final results of the election for at least a few days, right, Angel?
Yeah, that's right, Daniela. Pundits are predicting that tonight's results will favor President Trump, but they could shift in favor of Biden once mail-in votes are counted. They're calling this a possible red mirage or a blue shift.
And we will know the definitive election results for at least a few days because many states do not start to count those mail-in ballots until after the election.
Now, this isn't anything new. States have offered the option to vote by mail for a long time, but with the coronavirus pandemic, many states have expanded on how many people are eligible to vote by mail. This year, these ballots can seriously impact election results.
And there's been quite a bit of controversy surrounding the U.S. Postal Service this election. WEBN's Amok Matthews has the story.
With the election underway, overhauls to the United States Postal Service have been a major source of outrage nationwide. Mail-in ballots have been the subject of significant controversy. Democrats fear Postmaster General Louis DeJoy is intentionally delaying the delivery of critical mail through sweeping reforms he made in September. President Trump has continually attacked the legitimacy of mail-in voting.
They're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud. They found them in creeks. They found some with the name Trump, just happened to have the name Trump just the other day in a waste paper basket. This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen.
Despite these claims, many state and local election officials maintain the integrity of mail-in voting. The Bipartisan Policy Center says not only are rates of voter fraud extremely low, but even before the pandemic, all states allowed some form of absentee voting. The center even says that mail-in voting actually reduces fraud instead of promoting it, because it constantly requires jurisdictions to regularly update voter residences. Federal judges have struck down DeJoy's postal reforms at least 8 times now. As part of a settlement with Montana Governor Steve Bullock, the U.S. Postal Service has promised to form an election task force, devote additional resources to handling election mail, and install monitors to ensure ballots are postmarked properly to aid election officials. In Massachusetts, voter advocacy groups like Mass Vote have urged folks to mail in their ballots as soon as they could.
What we're telling folks is you should really mail your ballot a week before the election, if not sooner. If we're 5 days out from November 3rd, there's no guarantee that it's going to arrive on time just because, the Postal Service is working so slowly.
While some states can start processing their ballots earlier, tonight the process is just beginning for others. It could be days before a presidential winner can be properly declared. For WEBN, I'm Amok Matthews.
So as you can see there, COVID-19 has made early and mail-in voting far more popular than past years.
This election, there have been record amounts of early voters in many states. In some areas, early voting surpassed total voter turnout in 2016 election. Angel, let me give you this quick fact. A week before the election, 66 million people had cast early voting ballots. These were both in person and mail. That is 19 million more pre-election votes than 2016. And many states either met or approached their total vote count for the 2016 election.
Yeah, so early voting, like you're saying, early voting in Texas and Hawaii already surpassed turnout from the 2016 election. More than 9 million people casted their ballots, And pre-election day, like you said, 2/3 of 2016 turnout. That's not normal. I think part of that is because of COVID-19. It's a little bit more difficult right now. It's a little scary for most states, especially blue states, to go out in person, to get to these polls, to be around people for hours at a time. That can be a little bit scary, but as we see the numbers come in, we'll see more mail-in voting come in, and we'll see what the provisional ballots come out to as well. Because, again, if you send in your mail-in vote and decide to go in person after you've sent in your mail-in vote, you do have to fill out a provisional ballot, which is counted, I think, a week after. So we're gonna have to wait a little bit for those results.
Massachusetts Senator Barry Feingold was a key player in expanding early voting in the state. Tyler caught up with the senator earlier this week to discuss voting here in Massachusetts.
What kind of drove you to give Massachusetts residents another option to cast their ballot?
Well, I think the biggest thing, especially this year, was the whole with COVID and people being afraid to leave their house. And really what we want is we want people to participate in democracy, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent. And what we saw in the primary is a record turnout. We had 1.6 million people participate in the primary on September 1st. The previous record in a primary was 1.5 million. So this is great for democracy and something that we should never take for granted. The more people that participate, the better our country will be.
So it's worked in Massachusetts as a result of your reform bill, as well as a bunch of other measures. Massachusetts residents have a bunch of different ways to get involved. They can vote early, they can vote by mail, they can register online. Do you see this as a model that should be adapted to the rest of the country?
I do. I think the more that you can have people participate, the better. Understand there's a big difference in what we do in other states. We chose not to mail out ballots to everyone. We mailed people a card that you could take an affirmative step to get a ballot in the mail. So what we're doing is we're making sure that people are signing under the pains and penalty of perjury that it's them who's actually requesting the ballot, and making them take the affirmative step to either drop this in the mail or to drop it off at their local town or city hall.
Well, earlier this year, President Trump announced that the U.S. would be withdrawing from the World Health Organization. Daniela, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, this could have serious consequences for American citizens.
Absolutely, Angel. Some quick facts before we get on base with this. The U.S. has been a member of the World Health Organization since 1948, and it's the largest donor among all members. Just last year, they donated $450 million. This could be critical for the U.S., especially right now with the whole COVID-19 pandemic. This could impede access to a COVID-19 vaccine if it was created overseas. And the U.S. will be blind to thousands and various health threats in foreign locations like COVID-19 was. So I think this could impact Americans in ways that we don't even think about.
Yeah, we're going to have to think about if Trump gets reelected, where that's going to lead us. That could, like you're saying, that could really limit our knowledge of world viruses. And I don't think President Trump would have a problem with that, because the reason why he ended up making that decision is because he said that the World Health Organization really wasn't prepared for it, and they weren't letting the U.S. know about the coronavirus pandemic. So to him, it's really not a big deal, but we'll have to see how that turns out if he does win this election. Now, if Joe Biden wins the election, what we might see is him reverse that decision, and he's come out and he said he doesn't intend to leave the World Health Organization because he believes that there are some irreplaceable benefits from being a part of that organization. So we'll have to see how that turns out. I do expect to see Joe Biden reverse that decision if he is elected president.
Absolutely, Andrew, and how we have seen throughout the time, we also have seen how President Trump suggested he may fire Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been a key player with the whole COVID-19 pandemic and handling and everything. When we come back, a look at the potential of Texas to turn blue.
And the legal challenges against Texas drive-through voting centers. Stay with us.
When you look at the number of disasters in the U.S., chances are every area will deal with some kind of emergency in the next decade. And between school, sports, and social lives, chances are you won't be with your kids when it happens. Will they know what to do? Ready.gov/kids has the educational tools and information to make the conversation easy. When the time comes, chances are they'll feel prepared, not scared. So talk with your family today.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high five.
We have breaking news this evening. President Trump has been admitted to Walter Reed Hospital. This week was the United States' worst week yet for coronavirus cases.
President Trump reversed his decision to reject California's request for disaster relief.
After a long-going battle with cancer, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died.
That's all for tonight.
Thank you for watching WEBN News. For more, go to our website, WEBN.TV.
Or check us out on YouTube.
I'm Carly Bronkamon.
I'm Wesley Days.
I'm Benjamin Levine.
I'm Ezekiel Telemaco.
Have a good night.
Welcome back to WEBN's coverage of the 2020 presidential election. Texas has voted Republican in presidential elections since 1976, so why is it now a toss-up? Reporter Sam Wolf explains.
Texas has voted for a Republican president since 1980.
You're just like throwing your money out the window or burning it, right? If you try and run against a Republican candidate in Texas historically.
But many who live in the Lone Star State, like Amy Brown, say don't write off Texas as a lost cause Republican state.
If we can get voters to turn out, the demographics in this state indicate that there could be a shift.
The influx of Latinos and Hispanics, along with tons of people moving to Texas from blue states, are inching Texas closer to the left.
You potentially have a shift that gets you to Texas being a presidential Democratic state.
Amy sees this shift firsthand from forming a fundraising group of women that organize and raise large sums of money for progressive state and federal level candidates.
What's maybe driving some of these shifts towards more progressive values is healthcare.
Since Texas never bought in on the Affordable Care Act expansion of Medicare, Texas has one of the largest bodies of uninsured citizens in the nation. She also mentions the ICE detention facilities in Texas as another factor.
And that's, very close to home, given the number of immigrants from south of the border that are part of our citizenry.
And given Donald Trump's stances on these key issues,
there is this feeling that Texas actually could swing for Biden.
So will Texas flip to become a Democratic voting state in this election? It's certainly possible. And with 38 electoral votes up for grabs, Texas could make a big splash in this election. For WEBN News, I'm Samantha Wolf. Back to you.
Thanks, Sam. Harris County, the most populous county in Houston, plays a large part in the potential of Texas turning blue. This is mostly due to the large early voting turnout. But now Texan Republicans are looking to get over 127,000 votes thrown out. Angel, what more do we know about this?
Well, the reason it's important, Danielle, is because it's such a tight race, right? If this was Texas last election or any of the elections previous dating back to 1976, I don't really think we'd be worried about it because Texas has always been red. Now it's become a toss-up. Now the demographics are beginning to change. Now it's a big thing, right? 127,000 votes. That's a lot of votes. So that can either make a state go blue or it can hold things red. So we'll see how that goes. But Harris County, which includes Houston, as you mentioned, has set up 10 drive-through voting locations in reaction to the coronavirus pandemic. And as I said before, this is all partisan, right? Early voting, mail-in voting, that's all been Democratic, right? But now that you see it in Texas, they're setting up 10 mail-in and early voting locations, which may point to the state leaning a little more blue side. Tyler Englander is in the magic room with some more results coming in. Tyler, what do you got for us?
Florida, again, razor thin. You can see they're counting votes fast down in Florida. 79% of the precincts reporting Donald Trump has opened a lead against the former vice president. You can see a little bit less than 200,000 votes is the advantage for Donald Trump, about 2%. Again, it's important to remember, Florida is one of those states that counts their mail-in ballots prior to Election Day. Those should benefit Joe Biden. The problem for him, with 79% of the precincts reported, those mail-in ballots most likely have already been counted. Election Day, people who voted today should favor the president. That should allow the president to get a little bit bigger lead in Florida. The 29 electoral votes would be crucial for Donald Trump. Another state where we've got some early results in is Georgia. Only about 6 or 7% of the precincts reported. Donald Trump opening a pretty decent lead, 10 points, in the Peach State. Important thing to remember about Georgia, they had a lot of people vote early. Those numbers should be included in the early vote count. Joe Biden is hoping that that will benefit the Democrats. That's what we've got as far as results. Again, polls closed in Ohio, North Carolina, those critical battleground states. We're going to get you some results from those states in just a minute.
Our reporter Carly Bronkema spoke with Dr. Vincent Reynolds, a professor at Emerson College. He explains why President Trump has tried to invalidate mail-in and other early voting.
So first of all, we need to point out that Donald Trump is selectively saying that mail-in voting is working or not working. So in some instances, I know, for example, in Florida, he's been saying that mail-in voting works perfectly, and he's actually been using mail-in voting himself in some elections. So I think it's selective. I mean, for example, he's been attacking the state of Pennsylvania's system of mail-in voting, and obviously the state of Pennsylvania is a swing state right now. So he's selectively using that as a way to maybe inject a bit of uncertainty and a bit of, I think it's a bit about positioning himself ahead of a potentially loss in some states because of this early voting. So I think there's some strategic considerations there. If the Democratic Party wants to be successful in defeating Donald Trump, they need to, rally around Biden. I mean, I use the word rally, others will use the word settle. But the other thing is also trying to really reach out to soft Republicans as well, right? There's a lot of soft Republican voters or Republican Party voters that are looking for something different than Donald Trump. So I think it's a matter of finding sort of a common ground, and that's a lot because from moderate Republicans to progressive Democrats, there's a lot of daylight between their positions. So it's really about finding a way to rally all these voters together and really create a coalition that will enable the Democratic Party to be victorious on election day.
Well, Justice Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed to the Supreme Court only last week. She solidifies the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, with 6 of the 9 now leaning conservative. Already, some Democrats have been calling to pack the courts to counteract this majority. Just a quick definition of court packing. Court packing is the process of Congress adding more seats to the Supreme Court in an effort to secure a majority. What else do we know about court packing, Angel?
Well, in the 231-year history, there have been as few as 5 and as many as 10 justices. So as you can see, depending on what the cabinet is, if it's President Trump, let's say he's red, then we'll see a little more justices. Amy Coney Barrett now confirmed. We may see Joe Biden, who in the past has been against court packing. Now he's declined to comment. So if he's elected president, we might see him maybe nominate a few justices. We also saw Mitch McConnell back in Obama's presidency deny one of Obama's nominated justices. So anything can really happen. We'll have to wait and see depending on the winner of this election.
Yeah, and court packing goes back even to 1937, where President Franklin Roosevelt announced a controversial plan to expand the Supreme Court to as many as 15 judges, and he claimed this would make it more efficient. So as we have seen throughout this whole election, court packing is a defense mechanism for Democrats, and Republicans weaponize the idea of court expansion.
Coming up, Cohasset Select woman Carrie Thompson joins us live.
And an interview with the first African-American woman to moderate a presidential debate. This and more when we come back.
During high school, I hung with the wrong crowd and I never graduated.
I helped Santiago in many different ways, like all fathers do, because he always wanted to go to college.
I felt a little embarrassed to come back to school, but eventually once I came here, I knew that it's for a bigger goal.
He was very dedicated, hardworking. He connected with his teachers, he connected with other students. That was one of the key reasons why he was able to keep forging ahead.
Find free adult education classes near you.
Me and my boy Matt had it good. He had catnip that was off the hook. But one day, he brings a girl home, and she's allergic to cats. Every sneeze was a nail in my coffin. Now I'm in a shelter. It's decent, but they don't even have Wi-Fi.
Welcome to WEBN Sports. I'm Becca McMahon.
And I'm Cooper Sherman. We begin with tonight's top stories.
The only thing that people want to talk about is Michael Jordan. I'm tired of it.
Nobody is going into Gillette and beating the Patriots come playoff time.
He is the entirety of that rushing offense. They are playing in their first World Series since 2008.
Do you really trust Josh Allen to win you a playoff game?
Kemba, double team, kicks it up. Marcus Smart steps into one and drills a wide open three. The Colts get the win 31-27.
And against all odds, the Tennessee Titans defeat the Kansas City Chiefs in Nashville.
Welcome back to WEBN's Election Night Special.
Joining us now on the phone is Cohasset Select woman Carrie Thompson. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us.
Carrie, you specialize in coaching and training political candidates. In this election, we have two candidates with very different perspectives on critical issues happening in the country. Based on your experience working with political candidates, what are some things you would say voters should analyze more when choosing a candidate to vote for?
Great question. Obviously, I want to believe that voters are focusing on policy and substance behind that policy and where they feel that a candidate will better take them in the direction that they want to go in terms of how they want the country to go. But I also do think personality and temperament matters. And if you look at a candidate's authenticity and ability to relate to people and the warmth and strength they project, I think those things matter a lot. Especially being president, you want someone who behaves like an adult in the room and someone that you can trust with your own safety. And I will say, I think that Biden as a candidate has done a much better job of projecting strength and, you know, being an adult way more than the current president has.
Definitely, Carrie. Quick question for you. As a former Republican and a former Democrat, how do you grade both candidates' campaign trails throughout COVID-19? I know we just talked about safety with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but they seem to be appealing to their fan bases.
They do. And I think this could be a close night tonight watching. I think that the Biden campaign has taken safety much more seriously. And if you look at how the Trump campaign has behaved, they've behaved a lot like the Trump White House has behaved, where they're not taking the pandemic as seriously and don't have as much of a plan, but their base doesn't seem to care about that either. So I don't necessarily think the campaign's behaviors on COVID has really impacted that many votes. I think that votes are being more impacted overall by the current national state of affairs with how the pandemic has been handled.
Carrie, the app TikTok has been a platform where a lot of Gen Z voters have voiced their concerns and spread their message with this whole election 2020. We have seen a lot of trends related to the 2020 election. How can candidates use apps like TikTok to their advantage?
Great question. For a candidate to do well now, 2020 and beyond, they need to be adept at using all social media platforms, especially TikTok. And I've loved watching, you know, the presidential campaigns and especially campaigns at more local and statewide levels adapt to that. I think every campaign now needs to have a digital staff and a digital strategy that is on Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. All of those matter and all of those get a big fan base behind them. I especially think the use of TikTok in this election has really inspired Gen Z voters and younger voters to get out and vote and volunteer.
Well, Carrie Thompson, thank you so much for joining us. From a competitor to a vice president, California Senator Kamala Harris went from running against Biden to running with him. Reporter Lily Sexton has more. Lily?
Kamala Harris is the current vice presidential candidate running with Democratic nominee Joe Biden. She's the first woman of color to be on a major party ticket, and if elected, she'll be the first woman to serve as vice president in United States history.
I accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States of America.
Her nomination came after years of serving as senator for California, in addition to endorsing Joe Biden after her own unsuccessful presidential campaign that ended in December 2019. Kamala Harris pitched herself as a candidate who could appeal to both progressive and moderate voters. She has also been an advocate for reproductive rights and closing the gender wage gap, but her signature issue is criminal justice reform. Harris detailed her agenda for reform, including creating national standards for police conduct, lowering the prison population, ending mandatory minimum sentencing, and abolishing private prisons. In the aftermath of George Floyd's death in police custody, she participated in protests in Washington, D.C. Harris serves on 4 Senate committees and is known for her tough questions. This translated well when she performed strongly against Mike Pence in October's vice presidential debate.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking.
She has also faced criticism from her party because of her actions as California's Attorney General in 2014, when she defended the death penalty and appealed a federal judge's decision that it was unconstitutional.
It is the will, I believe, of a majority of people that the most severe crimes be met with the most severe consequences.
Harris has also received criticism because of her office's handling of over-incarceration and wrongly convicted people. But despite her mixed record as Attorney General, Harris brands herself as a progressive prosecutor.
I plan on focusing on our common issues, our common hopes and desires, and in that way unifying our country, winning this election, and turning the page for America.
For WEBN, I'm Lily Sexton.
Thanks, Lily. Carol Simpson was the first African-American woman to moderate a presidential debate in 1992. Almost 30 years later, I had the chance to speak with her about this year's presidential debates. Here's what she had to say.
My name is Carol Simpson, and I will be the moderator for tonight's 90-minute debate, which is coming to you from the campus of the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia.
Politics had always been the realm of white males, okay? They were the smartest. They covered the White House, and it was a fight by women like me in the 70s to give us the same opportunities as the men. We've gone to school, we got our local news experience, we're capable, you put us on your air. Now, why is it that why can't we moderate a presidential debate? And I think the women have done a fantastic job. I'll pat myself on the back. I think I did a fantastic job. But all the women that have done these debates, Savannah Guthrie was fantastic. Interviewing Trump, it wasn't a debate, it wasn't the town hall debate, but just as a moderator, she held his feet to the fire. She wasn't letting him get away with anything. I noticed that Kristen Welker, when she was doing the last debate, she did a very good job, and I'm proud of her. She was the second Black woman to moderate a presidential debate after me, and it took 28 years to get another Black woman. So I was pulling for her all the way. And if you could look at that and not think that a woman is as capable as a man with questioning these candidates and being strong enough to go toe-to-toe with them, then you're blind, you're deaf. You couldn't see and hear what was going on.
As you head towards the 9 p.m. mark, more polls are starting to close.
Tyler, what are these early results looking like?
Thanks, Danny. Ohio, critical state. This was a state that Donald Trump won by 9 points 4 years ago. You can see the former Vice President, Joe Biden, opening up a pretty significant advantage against the president. Again, about 12%. Again, we discussed this a little bit earlier. Ohio, it's a state that's whiter. It's a state that's a little bit older. That should be the president's base. However, the demographic polls say Donald Trump's struggling with people who are older due to his response to the coronavirus. We're going to watch this as the night goes on. Ohio is one of those states that doesn't count its mail-in ballots first, so we would expect as the mail-in ballots come in a little bit more for Joe Biden. If we can move on to Georgia, another state, we talked about it, a really reliable red state for Republicans dating back really to the 1950s. Donald Trump, 23% of the vote in. He's got a 12-point lead on the vice president in Georgia. Again, Donald Trump is playing defense in this race. Georgia, he has to win. Ohio, he has to win. Good sign for the former Vice President Joe Biden that he's up in Ohio. Again, still waiting for those 3 critical blue wall states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. That should give us more information on the state of this race. Danny and Angel, back over to you.
Thanks, Tyler. Now we're joined by Patricia Comfort, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So there are 15 women in the Senate right now running as challengers, 4 women running for open seats, and 8 women running as incumbents. How have women politicians continued to smash barriers in politics?
Yeah, well, great question. You know, as people know, the 2018 midterm election saw the highest number of women elected to Congress, 131 women, so that makes up about 25%. And that, remains a record to this day. And I think, if you want to look at Massachusetts, right now we have 28.5% of women in the legislature, so that's 46 in the House and 12 in the Senate. And unfortunately, Massachusetts ranks 27th in the nation for women in state legislature. So even though this also is a record number in history of women in the House and Senate in Massachusetts, we still, as you can see, have a long way to go.
Patricia, throughout the years, we have seen how women have become more prominent in politics, but many people believe politics is still heavily dominated by men. Do you think that even with this belief, women's influence in politics has grown?
I think the women that you see in politics obviously tend to be very strong women. So, for example, let's take Nancy Pelosi. She is the first woman elected as Speaker of the House, and that took place in 2007. So think about that. All the years, of Congress, and it took till 2007 for women to become Speaker of the House. So I think with women like her, women like Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, several of the other women that were elected with Ayanna, these are all very strong women. So I think that their influence on women and young girls as they come up is really something to be seen and sort of very impressive.
Well, you spoke on her right there, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She opposes what she calls Donald Trump's disrespectful rhetoric towards women. Do you believe women voters, Republican, Democrat, Independent, all of them, do you believe they'll move with her in this fight?
I think if women really tune into what Donald Trump's attitude is towards women, I personally don't see how any woman could support him. He is absolutely misogynistic. And if you just look at what he said over the years, I just don't see how any woman could support him in terms of what he says and what he does. So I think that someone like Ayanna is someone who represents women's interests. She is for the rights that women have gained over the years, and in stark opposition to I think what Donald Trump represents.
Patricia, thank you so much for joining us tonight. When we come back, an interview with the presidents of Emerson College Polling.
And how athletes have used their platforms to encourage voting. Stay with us.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Queen is just my everything.
His smile did it. His smile, his eyes, his knowledge. My landlord, he decided that he wanted me to move based on the fact that I was transgender. Let's just respect people in everyday life for just being human.
Did you know bicyclists are often injured by vehicle doors opening into their path? To prevent hitting a cyclist with a car door, drivers should use their right hand to open the door, which forces them to look back over their shoulders so they can see people approaching on bicycles. Passengers should do the same using their left hands in case someone is riding a bicycle to the right of the vehicle. This simple safety procedure is an important step in keeping our roads safe. Remember, scan the street for wheels and feet.
Welcome back to WEBN's live election coverage.
Joining us now, we have the presidents of the Emerson College Polling Society. My first question for you is, some of the incumbent presidents that have lost a re-election term include Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and George H.W. Bush. Based on the trends we have seen with recent poll numbers and the massive early voting turnout, is this a possible outcome that could happen to President Trump in this election?
Yeah, I think that what we are seeing right now is that, it's so early and it really is anyone's game to take. What we've seen in the polls is that it looks really good for Biden, and there's definitely a map to victory for him. There's so many states that are toss-ups right now. So from what we can tell, Trump could lose this, and he could, be a part of that club of one-time presidents, but it really is just too early to call.
So Isabel, Kelsey, everyone is talking about the African-American turnout in Georgia. Georgia turnout exploded by 7% back in 2008, the debut of Obama. Do you see something similar happening in this year's election with Joe Biden?
Yeah, in Georgia, we think about not only 2008, but 2018 with Stacey Abrams. There's really been a big push for increasing voter registration in Georgia. And our poll had Georgia, again, as a toss-up. And it looks like so far we don't have, we have about 17% of the votes in. And it's looking better for Biden than it did for Clinton, but it's still too early to call.
I think what Izzy mentions with Stacey Abrams, it's been really interesting because since 2018, when she lost the gubernatorial race, she has been organizing constantly and trying to drive up voter registration and make it easier to vote in a state that is really hard to vote in. So I think it'll not only be interesting to see what the results are in Georgia, but to see if, her efforts and the efforts of many activists there have been successful, and if we see voter registration and turnout increase among groups like the youth vote and a lot of these ethnic groups, if they can turn out. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Right, definitely. Well, how we talk about Joe Biden, how has his popularity among moderates and older Americans changed the dynamic of swing states like Florida, Iowa, and North Carolina? Someone like Bernie Sanders was considered a little bit too progressive for those states.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we talk about the more moderate voter a lot. And I think that a way that we could possibly measure and gauge that is in each of our polls we ask in one of our demographic questions is what type of area that the voter lives in. And there's the urban city voter, there's the suburban voter, and the rural voter. And we're seeing that Joe Biden consistently across a lot of these states that are swing states has been able to carry that suburban voter, which is kind of a coveted voter and one that Trump has been going after, especially you hear a lot about the suburban woman. And, that's a voter group that is breaking for Biden, and that is a big win for him, and that could potentially be the voters that carry him to a victory in some of these states that are pretty competitive.
And guys, one last question for you. How has this election become really a referendum on President Trump? It almost feels like it's a yes Trump, no Trump, instead of a yes Trump, yes Biden race.
Yeah, I think that we kind of expected that from the get-go just because there was such shock at Trump being elected in 2016. We saw even in the 2018 midterms that the Democrats were really organizing at a level that they didn't in 2016 around Hillary Clinton. But I think COVID and the mismanagement of the crisis by President Trump has really escalated that Trump referendum because people in the country are very dissatisfied with the lockdowns, with the increasing cases, and just the general sense that the country is not doing well right now. So I think that has really hurt Trump and helped Biden.
Yeah, I would agree with Izzy that when we were going into this in the primaries, it was kind of thinking about what kind of personality is best to run against Trump. And it has kind of turned into almost just about coronavirus. And I think that will be a major telling in this election, that if people are happy with Trump's management of the virus and the pandemic, or if they're looking for new leadership to get them through these times.
Isabel and Kelsey, thank you for joining us tonight. Biden has tried to appeal to Gen Z voters through his social media posts and ads. What we have seen with these trends, Angel?
Well, I mean, there's a list of things with Joe Biden and his Gen Z. As you can see here, his Animal Crossing Dream Island that he created. It's, again, one of his efforts to try and appeal to the younger demographic. He had an Avengers event, a little reunion with the Marvel cast to reunite as a virtual fundraiser in support of Joe Biden. Hamilton event to cast a virtual fundraiser for his campaign. And then they're not affiliated affiliated with the campaign, but Gen Z group started a TikTok for Biden. So I mean, again, he's considered more of a moderate candidate, but he's really trying to appeal to the younger demographic.
Yeah, and in this election, we have seen high millennial and Gen Z voters come out and cast their vote. So obviously, candidates have to appeal more to these generations because, as you may know, Angel, these are the generations that are going to be voting in the next couple of elections that we have in the United States. So obviously, candidates have to look for ways to appeal to them.
Yeah, Joe Biden has said it himself. He doesn't consider himself the future. He considers himself as a bridge to the future. So I think he's just trying to create that little bridge between what we see now as the older voters, the older Democrats, older moderates, into the younger Democrats, the younger, more left-leaning demographic.
Absolutely.
Vishaka Mathur has focused her career around digital advertising. WEBN reporter Patty Tamayo sat down with her to talk about the political power of social media.
The potential with social media is huge. If you wanted to go to a certain section of your audience and you wanted to talk to them, that's possible on social media, and you can speak to them. I think it allows for more conversation, it allows for more access, and it allows for more opportunity for voters and constituents to hear from their candidates directly, unfiltered, and really ask them the questions that they need answers to before they vote.
What do you think have been some of the turning points with the advancement of technology and politics?
Well, I think Twitter's character limit has been very, very impactful. So it's an evolution of a platform, not just a platform, but like also different platforms. Within Facebook, you don't have a character limit. You can live stream, you can put up a video, you can put up photos. There's a whole variety of things you can do. That sort of changed when you go to Twitter, and when Twitter came around and sort of blew up. There's a character limit, there's a limit on number of photos you can share. Then you look at Instagram, which is even more different. It's a completely photo platform. So you have to have a photo to post there. You have to have a visual element to post there. It's been a gradual shift of what kind of content you can put on social media and customizing that content for each of the platforms. Social media might seem intimidating. It might not always seem like the most positive place to affect that change, but it has a real potential to change people's mind, and it should be seen as that and should be used as that as well.
Thanks, Patty. 9 o'clock has come, and you know what that means. More states have closed their polls.
Tyler, what updates do you have for us?
Florida, some new numbers coming out of the Sunshine State. 91% of precincts reporting 50% of the vote is in Donald Trump's quarter compared to 48% for the former Vice President Joe Biden. This is the best thing going right now for the president. Florida, a state he has to win. He looks good with their 29 electoral votes. Don't forget, Florida counted their mail-in ballots prior to the election. The rest of the vote should help the president. Up next here on our things, we've got Georgia, 27% of the votes in, 55% for Donald Trump, 43% for Joe Biden. Again, we heard a lot coming into this race about how Georgia was more purple than red. Donald Trump kind of bucking that trend early on. Again, only 27% of the vote in, a long way to go in Georgia. Up next, we've got Texas. Look at that Texas blue. 63% of the vote in. Joe Biden looking good, 50% to 48%. Just want to remind you guys, 4 years ago, Texas, at this point in the night, already went to President Donald Trump. Even if Joe Biden doesn't win Texas, this is good news for the rest of the map, especially in Arizona, a very similar electorate. The final state we've got here is North Carolina. The fight for 15 electoral votes in the Tar Heel state. Joe Biden got about a 6-point lead on Donald Trump. Again, we've talked about it all night. The president is playing defense. If North Carolina is in Joe Biden's corner, he's going to have a pretty good night. Danny Angel, back over to you.
Politicians are not the only ones using social media. Numerous celebrities have participated in movements to try and convince fans to vote. Reporter Avikar Glove focuses on how professional athletes are doing their part to increase voter turnout.
When Colin Kaepernick protested the national anthem at the start of a preseason game in August 2016, it was one of the most visual moments in recent memory of an athlete using their platform for social justice activism. Although there was plenty of pushback, the response ultimately led to a large number of players kneeling over the next few weeks. Fast forward to 2020, and athletes are as vocal on social issues as ever. After George Floyd's murder, NFL stars put out a video pushing the league to take a stronger position on systemic racism. In the NBA, after the Jacob Blake shooting, this happened.
Breaking news now, NBA television has just announced that the Milwaukee Bucks are boycotting the NBA playoff game that is scheduled to happen right now. This coming after the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin.
These moments of activism have led athletes to push their teams and leagues to improve on getting out the vote in an election year. Teams across several professional leagues are turning their stadiums into voting locations. NBA superstar LeBron James has teamed up with other athletes to launch More Than a Vote, an organization aimed at, among other issues, stopping voter suppression. The NFL has a voting initiative aimed at maximizing voter registration. Their Game Plan to Vote ad plays frequently during games. This has been an unprecedented year for early voter turnout, overall and among athletes. Over 90% of NBA players are registered to vote, after only 20% of eligible players voted in last election. Now players are doing their part to make sure fans get in their ballots before the final buzzer. For WEBN, I'm Avi Kargloff.
Yeah, nice shot, Avi. Professional athletes are some of the most visible faces of the Black Lives Matter movement. Our reporter Amog Matthews explores just how the BLM movement is impacting politics.
Today, many are heading to the ballots because they consider this year a reckoning against racial injustice in this country. The Black Lives Matter movement embodies that struggle today. The BLM movement advocates for nonviolent civil disobedience and is against all racially motivated violence. Black Lives Matter remains an incredibly polarizing movement. President Trump has consistently denied the existence of systemic racism and has framed the movement as an attack on law enforcement.
Well, you have to understand, the first time I ever heard of Black Lives Matter, they were chanting, "Pigs in a blanket," talking about police. Pigs, talking about our police. Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. I said, that's a horrible thing. And they were marching down the street.
Biden has not explicitly commented on the movement, but has commented on the racial divide in the country.
A country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us. Leadership that brings us together. Leadership that can recognize pain and deep grief of communities that have had a knee on their neck for a long time.
Across the nation, protesters have been advocating for the implementation of immediate police reform and to reinvest into social services. Here in Boston, Black Lives Matter has energized voters, and the city has seen dozens of protests over the past few months.
I will protect Black women.
A Boston BLM organizer and activist, Toye Washington, says that the movement has exposed more than just police brutality.
This year, especially like in Boston, seeing the gentrification, seeing where all the money's going, where taxpayer dollars are going, a lot of people, Black Lives Matter has not just brought attention to racial inequalities and racial inequities. Like, it has been bringing attention to everyone, and a lot of people keep talking about this is going to be like a race war. It's not about a race war. It's about the people and the 1%.
With race relations in American society coming to the forefront, the election of the next president will be crucial in keeping the country united. For WEBN, I'm Amog Matthews.
Joining us now is WEBN's Amog Matthews. Amog, you mentioned the protest in Boston and how protesters have been advocating for immediate police reform. Has any of this happened in Boston? Has the city made any changes?
Yeah, so on October 13th, Marty Walsh announced that he
So over the summer, he created a task force, and essentially it's an independent task force, and they decided on new reforms to make for Boston and a new plan. And so on October 13th, they released that plan, and Marty Walsh essentially said that we'll be taking all of the recommendations. So the main points of that plan essentially are they want to create an office of police accountability and transparency. They want all police officers to have body cameras at all times. They're going to create a unit on the police department called the Diversity Inclusion Unit. They're also planning on recruiting specifically from Boston high schools, which I think is absolutely great. But yeah, no, they have some real concrete reforms coming out. There seems to be some pushback right now. The police unions, the Boston Patrolmen's Association, they have not given a complete comment, but right now the head of that has given not so great feedback from. They largely claim that the task force didn't really include them in the input. That being said, this is definitely concrete movement that concrete plans that they've made moving forward. So we'll see how it goes down. It's currently being implemented right now.
So, Mo, we saw it in your piece. Black Lives Matter will definitely sway the election. How do you think the movement will affect the presidential race in battleground states like Georgia, where 32% of its electorate is black?
Yeah. So Georgia is very interesting because states like Georgia, states like Texas, they're deeply red. But now we see that they're either way. And so right now, one of the polls from 270 to win. Their national average for Biden versus Trump is 49 to like 46.2. So Biden is leading right now, which is insane. So there's something to be said about that. Earlier today, I talked to my friend who's from Georgia, and he was saying what's really interesting, especially how BLM is affecting it, is that a lot of the kids are coming out. And as you would think, as you might not think, a lot of white suburban women are coming out in support of Biden as well. So it's very interesting to see how Biden has a slight lead right now, but it's too close to call. So we'll see how it goes.
So we have some breaking news here. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has secured re-election in Kentucky. He got 63% of the vote. He says, quote, "I'm confident that I'm going to be successful. I've made my case to the people of Kentucky. I think it's a convincing case." McConnell said during a recent campaign that he is excited and looking forward to his new re-election. Coming up, we explore if Joe Biden can reclaim the blue wall.
And we discuss each candidate's major platforms. Don't go anywhere.
Have you ever experienced the double threat? It's when pedestrians are crossing where multiple lanes of traffic are headed in the same direction. But only one lane of traffic stops, while the adjacent lane continues. Drivers or cyclists, if a vehicle is stopped, you should stop too, as a pedestrian may be crossing. Pedestrians, you may not be visible to an approaching driver. Always proceed slowly and wait for all lanes of traffic to stop before continuing across. Remember, scan the street for wheels and feet.
I don't remember how it started.
Talk to Dad.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Hey guys, how are you today? Good. I'm here to talk about how with technology you can make amazing worlds. Come with me. My team and I bring the Halo world to life.
Is that you?
That is me. I wasn't a math genius and I knew nothing about coding. But you guys do. You guys have the power to change things.
I want your job.
I want you to have my job.
Welcome back to WEBN's election special.
A big part of how President Trump claimed victory in 2016 is how he flipped blue wall states. Reporter Annie Bennett explains more.
Donald Trump broke many barriers when he was elected in 2016, being the first political outsider to become commander-in-chief. But no result was more surprising than his smashing of the blue wall. The blue wall in politics refers to 18 states and Washington, D.C. that have voted Democratic in every presidential election since 1992. In 2016, that changed. Carrie Thompson explains what sets Biden apart from Clinton.
He's an old white guy. And I mean that with love. I mean, I actually think that he's the right man for the moment. And unfortunately, there really still isn't a bigger uphill battle for women in politics, especially at this level. And I think that there's a lot more internalized, whether it's conscious or unconscious misogyny in a lot of people's votes. And you just don't see the amount of insults that worked for Hillary sticking with Biden.
The question Democrats should be asking this year is simple. Can Joe Biden win back the blue wall? Paul Watanabe, a political science professor at UMass Boston, believes that so far, Biden has a real chance of winning back the blue wall and then some.
Can the Democrats maintain their blue wall? And I think that they can. And can they add to it from some of these swing states? And that's going to be the decisive factor.
Michael Goldman has been a political consultant for 7 different presidential elections and says that Biden's chances of winning are high, but more because people don't like Donald Trump.
Biden's leading by double digits. That's only happened once in my lifetime, having nothing to do with, quite frankly, Joe Biden and everything to do with Donald Trump. And that's right across the country.
If Biden can win back the blue wall, he may be able to be an incumbent president for the first time since 1992. Will he gain back the blue wall? Americans will find out soon enough.
Thanks, Annie. Well, Trump and Biden's platforms have numerous differences. President Trump's main focus is on American production, while Joe Biden is putting most of his attention into climate change policies. Daniela, we should also mention that Biden's emphasis is on police reform as well.
Yes, Angel, absolutely. As we have seen throughout this whole election year, Black Lives Matter has been a movement that has risen since summer and has caused a lot of controversy as well as something that candidates have to talk about as well. I also want to focus on the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic is also one of the main topics that candidates have to focus on, and they have emphasized a lot in their agendas.
Yeah, and we talk about taxes. I think that's the big thing for Republicans. They don't want big taxes that Joe Biden is thinking of putting on. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So Joe Biden plans to raise taxes only on those who make more than $400,000 annually, from 37% to 39.6%, while Donald Trump believes that tax hikes would be detrimental to the economy. Either way, you can go with that.
Yes, Angel, and another one of the topics that is very critical in this election is climate change. The number of climate-related disasters in the country have been increasing. Reporter Simona Riccardi provides an insight on this.
The images of climate change in action throughout 2020 are staggering, and as both major parties' presidential campaigns progress, the issue of climate change has become increasingly partisan.
We have the cleanest air, the cleanest water, and the best carbon emission standards that we've seen in many, many years.
Vice President
And we
Biden.
haven't destroyed our industries.
The Trump administration has not prioritized climate change, pivoting away from the Clean Power Plan and Paris Climate Agreement towards gas and oil production in the U.S.
4 more years of this man eliminating all the regulations that were put in by us to clean up the climate, to limit emissions will put us in a position where we're going to be in real trouble.
Meanwhile, Biden's agenda pushes for environmental policy reform, aiming to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, invest in clean energy, and hit net zero on carbon emissions in the next 20 years. The campaign faced criticism for its moderate stance on fracking, but Biden plans to ban new oil and gas permitting on public lands and waters.
We need other industries to transition to get to ultimately a complete zero emissions by 2025. What I will do with fracking over time is make sure that we can capture the emissions from the fracking, capture the emissions from gas. We can do that, and we can do that by investing money in doing it, but it's a transition to that.
Scientists report that climate change is an escalating issue. Given the campaign's opposing stances, this election is crucial to determining how the country will address environmental issues for the next 4 years. For WEBN, this is Simona Riccardi.
Now, let's turn it over to Tyler Englander for more results. How are things looking, Tyler?
We've got some new results coming out of the state of Ohio. 54% of the precincts reporting the former Vice President Joe Biden has opened up an 8-point lead against Donald Trump. Keep in mind, Ohio did count mail-in ballots early, so Democrats expected to have a pretty decent lead as the Election Day vote sweeps in. That is expected to help the president. Also, remember the fact I told you earlier, 28 out of the 30 elections since 1900, the winner of Ohio has won the presidency. Keep an eye on Ohio as we get some more of the vote. Could play a key role in this election. Up next, we're going to take a quick look at Florida. 91% of the precincts reporting this is starting to look more and more solid for the president. 50% of the vote, Donald Trump's got 50% of the vote. Joe Biden, 48%. Again, Florida counted the mail-in ballots. The rest of the votes coming in are expected to go towards Donald Trump. Would be huge for him. Florida's 29 electoral votes would put him within striking distance. Finally, we've got our first results from one of the blue wall states. Before you go, why is Joe Biden up 30? Again, Pennsylvania. They did not count their mail-in ballots early. So this is Election Day votes right now. Pretty decent lead for Joe Biden, only 16% reporting. I wouldn't take too much stock into this right now. This lead is not going to be 30 points all night. Again, we're keeping an eye on Michigan as well as Wisconsin. Those key states in the 2016 election going to be critical once again here in 2020. Danny and Angel, back over to you.
Thanks, Tyler. Up next, we take a look at the Massachusetts ballot initiatives. Don't go away.
I'll never forget the day our landlord called and said, read your lease. No pets allowed. My owner tells him my dog ate the lease, but that didn't work. And now I'm stuck in a shelter. But this pit bull is ready for a new crib. I'm loving, loyal, and play well with others. So don't be intimidated by all my muscles, because the biggest one I have is my heart. That's right, I said it.
Julie was always a voracious reader. She'd carry 2 novels on an airplane because she'd read one on a 3-4 hour ride. And at some point, I began to notice that she would read a page and couldn't remember what she had just read, and she'd have to go back and read it again.
I don't remember much these days after I read, but less does for me, and I love it.
Oh, look, a redhead. Staring contest. You still got it. I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Sometimes the things we do or say can make others feel hurt, excluded, or isolated. Everything you say and do creates an impact.
How am I supposed to save the whole world?
You can't think about saving the world. You have to think about saving one person.
Because of you, someone's entire life can change. You don't have to be a superhero to have a positive impact.
Friends?
Friends.
Welcome back. While the Electoral College reform is still being debated, the move toward ranked choice voting is gaining traction in many states.
Reporter Lily Sexton explains how the Massachusetts ranked choice ballot measure would impact state elections.
This election, Massachusetts voters will have the option on whether or not to adopt a ranked choice voting system.
Ranked choice voting is an electoral system in which voters rank candidates by preference on their ballots. If a candidate wins a majority of first preference votes, they are declared the winner. However, if no candidate gets this majority of first choice votes, then it triggers a new counting process. The candidate with the lowest number of votes, along with the first preference votes cast for that candidate, are eliminated. That candidate's voters' ballots are redistributed to their second choice pick. This process continues until one candidate has the majority of the votes.
So I ran as an independent for governor back in 2014. People would say to me all the time, I love the idea of an independent candidate, but there's no way you can win. It's a wasted vote. In ranked choice, that doesn't happen anymore. So there's no more spoilers, there's no more wasted votes, there's no sense as a voter that you have to pick between the lesser of two evils. All that stuff has to go away, and ranked choice voting ends it.
Ranked choice voting is the second question on the ballot this fall. This system has already been adopted by the state of Maine as well as numerous cities nationwide.
It has all these amazing benefits for democracy in terms of more positive campaigning, more consensus, more desire of candidates to connect with voters and really listen to them, which is something that we're missing in our democracy today.
If voters approve question 2, it will be used in state and congressional elections, including some local races such as sheriff and district attorney. It will not be used in the presidential election. For WEBN, I'm Lily Sexton.
Thanks, Lily. Now, the next question on the Massachusetts ballot this year is even more controversial. WEBN's Kerrigan Knowles has more on the right to repair.
The Massachusetts Right to Repair Initiative, also known as Question 1, will appear on the Massachusetts 2020 general election ballot. If enacted, this initiative will update the state's right to repair laws to include electronic vehicle data. The new proposed law is a continuation of the Right to Repair Act that passed in 2012. The first act allowed for anyone to bring their car to any shop of choice, not just the dealer service center. This lets mechanics plug into the car's computer system to find the source of the problem, or even for the owner to repair their vehicle themselves if they have the device to do so. The difference between the current law and the new proposed right to repair is that the current law exempts the systems from wireless accessibility by both owners and repair facilities.
We passed that law in 2012, but technology has changed. If someone told you in 2005 you couldn't have an iPhone in 2020, you'd probably say yes in 2005 because you didn't realize that iPhones would be everywhere in 2020. Your car is no different. Your car is now a computer on wheels.
The new law brings into consideration telematics. Telematics are in newer models of vehicles and monitor the mechanical system in real time while wirelessly sending this information back to the manufacturer.
This is about diagnostic and repair codes that are accessible to the OBD port right now. That OBD port is becoming wireless.
A vote no on question 1 would still allow for mechanics to fix your vehicle for now. The anticipation is in the future, all vehicle data will be transferred wirelessly, meaning independent mechanics would not have the tools to fix your car. For WEBN, I'm Kerrigan Knowles.
Joining us now is WEBN's Kerrigan Knowles. Kerrigan, we've heard a lot about the yes on one argument. Can you tell us a bit more about what opponents of right to repair are saying?
Yes, so opponents have raised right now over $25 million in order to defeat the Right to Repair Act. This comes from major car manufacturers such as Toyota, Ford, etc. But one of the reasons is because of the vague wording on the ballot and also timing. Timing right now, when cars have just recently started to perfect wireless transmitting, is scary for voters because they don't want to be at risk for cybersecurity, at risk for hacking, and it's a lot of information that most voters don't know what to do with.
Kerrigan, in a letter written in July, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which is a U.S. federal government agency, part of the Department of Transportation, said that they were in favor of third parties having access to data necessary for repairs and diagnostics, but they also urged legislators to consider the cybersecurity risk of Question 1 in its current state. How do you think this affects voters on views on the proposed law, just by knowing that even a government agency has strong doubts about it?
Well, I think that this influences voters greatly. In that letter, it specifically says that the wording of the ballot and the timing, as I mentioned before, is something that a lot of voters don't understand and that they won't really know what to do with. It's scary, and that's mainly what these opponents have been using in ads and commercials, is using almost scare tactics, being, well, do you really want everyone to have access to personal information that you can store into your car? Like, you can put your phone into your car, you can connect accounts and everything like that. I mentioned in my interview with Tommy Hickney is that he even said that back in 2013 when this first passed is that it wasn't something that people were aware of, that all cars on the road, or 90% of cars on the road, would have access to these computer systems. And so in that letter, I feel like that does scare voters into either voting no or looking more into the logistics and behind it. Is this something safe that I want in my life and that I want for my car's future?
Kerrigan, more and more computer-run cars like Tesla are coming onto the road, and most of them are constantly transmitting information to their headquarters. How would a no on question 1 affect those car owners if perhaps their car malfunctions with no dealership around?
So this is actually the main focus of the Right to Repair Act. What happens is that now and in the future, most cars will have this wireless transmitting impact that Tesla has almost basically perfected. The only problem and why the Right to Repair Act is something that is on the Massachusetts ballot right now is that if a car such as Tesla in the example were to malfunction and the act is not passed, then there is really nothing that you can do independently or at an independent mechanic repair shop. So what would happen is that you would have to either take your car into the car dealership or into the nearest Tesla company. There is really no platform that is available right now that would allow independently to get into this car's wireless computer system. It would have to be done by the manufacturer themselves.
Thanks, Kerrigan. Tyler spoke to Senator Barry Feingold about his views on both Massachusetts ballot initiatives.
Why is it so important people vote yes on question 1? Is it for the independent repair shops?
Yeah, it's really for what we call the local mechanic that isn't affiliated with a dealership that's able to fix your car. And I think that what's really important is for lower socioeconomic communities. I believe this is essential to fix some of the older cars as well. That it just cost prohibitive to bring into a dealership.
Now, critics of the measure, I'm sure you've seen the commercials, will say that the right to repair puts people's safety at risk. A guy named Connor Yuntis, he is a spokesperson for the Coalition for Safe and Secure Data. He says there are some serious safety risks when it comes to stalkers and sexual predators getting access to people's information. Is that fear real? Does this initiative do enough?
Yeah, I'm really not going to comment on that. I'm just going to comment that I do think question 1 will provide more access for more people, and I think that it will cause there to be more competition in the market, and also allow people in lower socioeconomic communities to get their car repaired at less cost to them.
I want to talk a little bit about the election, since you are the chairman for the Committee on Election Laws. Where do you stand on question 2 when it comes to ranked choice voting? How does that work, and do you support that initiative?
Well, I'm just concerned about it. I think ranked choice voting has a lot of merit, but I'm concerned about the lack of adaptation in lower socioeconomic communities. So we've just seen mail-in voting where communities in higher socioeconomic areas took advantage of vote by mail, and as a result have had a higher turnout in percentage than lower socioeconomic communities. And what I'm concerned about is that there has not been enough testing to see how do lower socioeconomic communities respond to ranked choice voting. And if they don't partake in it or are confused by it, then in a lot of ways they're disenfranchised. So that's why I have some concerns about it. And I think that's why I'm a little wary of question 2.
Now we head over to Tyler for some last-minute results. How are things looking, Tyler?
Thanks, Danny. Let's take a look at where things stand as far as the all-important race to 270 electoral votes go. You can see on the top left of your screen, Joe Biden, 119 electoral votes compared to 93 for the president. No real surprises so far. Something to keep in mind, the big states, 55 electoral votes out in California, those will go to Joe Biden. That will get him about 100 short of where he needs to be in order to win the presidency. States we're keeping an eye on, Florida, the president looking very solid. Those 29 electoral votes would be huge for him. It would keep him in striking distance in order to catch the president. The states, unfortunately, where it's going to be a long night, the most important ones, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they are not allowed to count mail-in ballots until Election Day. It's going to take a long time for those states to count. Those 3 states likely to decide the election. Another thing I want you to keep an eye on, Ohio, North Carolina, 15 electoral votes in North Carolina, 16 in Ohio. Joe Biden running pretty well, feels pretty good in those states. If he can win North Carolina and Ohio, it may be enough to earn him 4 years in the White House. For the last time, Danny Angel, back over to you.
Well, Tyler, thank you, and thank you so much for joining us for WEBN's election night coverage.
Follow our continuing coverage on our website, WEBN.TV, or our YouTube channel, WEBN-TV Boston. I'm Daniela Lobo Rivera.
And I'm Angel Salcido. Thank you, and have a good night.